Good afternoon. We are here today at the Department of Consumer Affairs Hearing Room 186 at 1747 North Market Boulevard in Sacramento, California, 95834. And this is, we are convening the Exempt Setting Committee meeting of the Board of Behavioral Sciences. Ms. Kitamura, would you like to call us to order and establish a quorum?
Good afternoon. Patricia Lawson.
Here.
Christina Wong. Here. Betty Conley.
Here.
Karen Hines is absent today. We have a quorum. And I just want to remind everybody to be sure to turn your mics on. There's a button right on the front of your mic. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we have a quorum. We can get started in business. Let's see, how about we can do introductions. Why don't we start with Mr. Soderberg, and then we can go in the room, whoever would like to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Steve Sodergren.
Sodergren,
either way. I'll say Sodergren though. Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer of the Board.
Betty Conley, LEP member of the board. Christina Wong, LCSW member.
Patricia Dawson, public member.
Kim Matson, Executive Officer for the board.
Spencer Walker, the board's attorney.
Christy Berger, Regulatory Analyst for the board.
Roseanne Helms, Legislative Analyst for the board.
Darlene Davis, Hope Counseling Center.
Shelley Jones, DCA.
Okay, thank you. Terrific. All right. So just a reminder about why we decided to convene this meeting. It's an ad hoc committee. When we are done and we've achieved our purpose, we will no longer be in existence. So we're trying to make ourselves out of business. So the Exempt Setting Committee was appointed in November 2016. The purpose of the committee is to review practice within an exempt setting and determine if consumers are receiving services consistent with the standard of care for mental health professionals. So we've already had one meeting, and we intend to hold a series of meetings to conduct an open-ended inquiry gathering information and data. And stakeholders and interested parties are going to be given an opportunity to provide input, feedback, and express their concerns, of course, not only in the meetings, but in writing, by phone, by email as well. So we think it's going to take about 18 months, maybe sooner. We'll see. Okay. Okay, so let's get started. So in our last meeting, we called for some additional information. Thank you, ladies. I see you've provided it for us. So one of the things we had a question was what other agencies had definitions for exempt, it was exempt in private practice settings. And you've given us some in the packet, but I think is this Christy? It is, right? First. Okay, so Christy, we'll let you go.
Sure, yeah.
Thank
so
you.
This is an update from the prior meeting. And what we did is looked at other states, and then we also looked at, for California, looked at the Board of Psychology, and I wasn't able to find any other health professions in California that had exempt settings. So we looked at those in the last meeting, and Attachment A has that information. And just briefly, all the states that we surveyed, except for one, has some type of exemption for governmental entities. So that was across the board. Some of them have limits on that, but they all have something like that. So what we now have is information on New York, Ohio, and Vermont, and we did that because it's always good to look at more states, but also I had found private practice definitions for those states, and we thought it would be good to have information on both their exempt settings and their private practice definitions so that we can match all of them across the board. So going to our Attachment A. And then page 5 of your packet, so New York. We'll start with New York, which is one of the ones added. This one was a little complicated for me to sort of parse out. They do, similar to almost every other state, they do exempt accredited or approved colleges and universities with some restrictions, mostly for those who are pursuing a counseling-related degree. For public schools and private schools, they do have an exemption, but only if they're special education schools, and they have to obtain a waiver and meet certain requirements, and the waivered entities are subject to discipline and penalties. There are some exemptions for there are exemptions for government entities and nonprofits. The nonprofits also have to obtain a waiver and are subject to discipline. The really interesting thing about New York, and I wasn't aware of this, is prior to 2003, New York only licensed psychologists. They didn't license any other mental health professions. So, and when the licensure laws were implemented, all of those settings, government entities, especially, were allowed to continue employing people who were not yet licensed. So they basically, that new law created a temporary exemption, but they keep extending it, and just really recently they granted an additional extension to 2018. They're trying to close that exemption, but the government agencies are pushing back, so they're kind of going back and forth with that. So that's where New York is at, and they've done some extensive analyses of their workforce and the possible impacts to government agencies if they were to take away the exemption. So I found some really interesting information, but that's New York. Did anybody have any questions on that?
I did. I was hoping one of the professionals in here could tell me what's the analog in California for, I think, an LMHC. Is that a...
That's like LPCC.
It is.
It is
okay.
the equivalent, yeah.
Right.
And several other states have that specific title as well.
Is it mental health counselor?
Licensed mental health counselor,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Christy, I was going to add, did you find any information on the waiver and what the content was? Or is that something we should, if we had a desire to know, we'd have to dig into it?
The waiver application's on their website, so
Okay.
that's something that I pulled up and looked at. It's a fairly extensive application, but yeah, it goes through a review process. They have to submit certain documentation.
Okay.
And then, I'm not, I could get more details on that if we want to get that any further. So. Ohio was the next state that we added for accredited and approved colleges and universities. There are no exemptions except for, again, students pursuing a counseling-related degree. The public schools are exempt, but they have to be certified by the Board of Education. Private schools can also be exempt, but they have to meet certain standards set by the Board of Education. Very interesting that government entities are exempt except for state agencies. Not sure how that happened, but and then nonprofits, only the American Red Cross is exempt, and only if the services relate to military families, veterans, or disaster relief. There's one other small exemption, which is some certain county-approved programs. So they could be a private entity approved by the county that only if they train individuals with mental retardation or other developmental disabilities. That's Ohio. And then on the next page, Vermont is the other one. Similar thing with the colleges and universities. No exemptions for public or private schools. And no government entities except for the Agency of Human Services. And no nonprofits. So Vermont is very restrictive on... But the interesting thing about Vermont is, again, they do license mental health professionals, but licensure is not required in order to practice psychotherapy. So it's unlicensed individuals have to submit their information to the licensure board for entry on a public roster of unlicensed psychotherapists. They're subject to standards of professional conduct and subject to discipline. And if you had held a license at one point and that license was suspended or revoked, they're not eligible to be on that list of unlicensed individuals. So some interesting things when you start looking at other states. And I think those were the three. Yes, that's it for the other states as far as the exempt settings.
Thank you, Christine. Are there any questions?
Okay. I just have a comment. I like the carve-out that Oregon did where the exemption doesn't apply to someone whose license to practice is revoked or suspended because the person engaged in sexual activity. I think that carve-out might be helpful for us, maybe not that specific language, but that's some of the concerns that were raised, that once we have disciplined a license, that you could go to a setting where there is an exemption and continue to practice. So that might be useful.
That was my comment too. I thought it was that, but I didn't think it should be just limited to sexual activity. I was thinking if somebody's had their license revoked, that's pretty serious.
I agree.
Yeah. think we mess around with that. Yes?
I'm just, it's just a comment, looking at the variety of, the restriction, from like Texas, very similar to California. And then you have all the other states that, kind of, different category would exempt and not. So I'm just thinking that, whether it's helpful or not helpful to us, just because, it doesn't look like, there's a model that we can actually follow.
Yeah, exactly. I think we can look, it helps us give us maybe some options if we're looking at making changes. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the crux of this committee, is that we're trying to determine whether anything needs to be changed. We need to, the whole purpose, in keeping with the purpose of the board, is to ensure consumer safety. And should our findings be through this committee that the consumers are safe exactly as they are right now through exempt settings, I don't think anything will need to change, but this provides us some really important information, so I appreciate that. They do seem to be all over the map, so. I guess the only thing I would say is if anybody has gone through a similar exercise as this before they did any of these exemptions, like maybe it was in New York, perhaps before their licensure changes in 2003, did they look at any, what they would restrict and what they said, because they had exempt settings?
They have some really extensive reports, reports to the legislature, workforce analyses. So there are some reports that I don't know if it was done prior to the licensure laws. I think there might have been one that was right along around that same time that was done, and then they keep updating it because of different concerns or issues that are being brought forward. So,
but what I'm saying is, if they have gone through some exercise where they looked at exempt settings or not, I don't know that they have, but they are across the board, don't they? Don't they have exemptions for every? They have exempt settings for everything except for.
Yeah, I can look for that bill that created the licensure categories and see if there's like a legislative analysis done where they had some sort of report.
Because they have some very specific caveats and folks that can't do it, and they must have had a reason for calling out those things. They must have had some basis for that.
Yeah.
Not that I want to make more work for you, Christine.
That's okay.
It's part of our due diligence here. Yes, I know.
So going back to the Board of Psychology, we did talk about the Board of Psychology's exempt setting laws, the California Board.
It's different.
And I just want to go over those again briefly. So that their exempt settings mirror ours. However, they do have a limitation of 5 years that an individual can work in those exempt settings. And the individual must be primarily gaining supervised experience toward licensure and must have a licensed psychologist as a supervisor. So it is more restrictive than what we require. Nonprofits, though, are only exempt if the agency receives at least 25% of funding from governmental sources other than Medi-Cal or Medicare. Or if an individual wants to work in a nonprofit that doesn't have that 25% threshold, they have to register with the board as a registered psychologist, and they have to meet certain qualifications, and there are some other limits. So the Board of Psychology does not exempt private schools, so that's how they're different from us. And the legislation that placed more of these restrictions was just passed in 2015. So the fact that they have to be supervised by a licensed psychologist and primarily earning supervised experience, and then gain licensure within a 5-year time frame. So they're looking at why the Board of Psychology did this. It was with the intention of providing greater consumer protection, and they felt that a lot of the individuals being served in exempt settings are more vulnerable individuals, some of that population, and to make their employees subject to some oversight and competency standards they felt was beneficial.
Okay, thank you, Christine.
Sure.
Any questions? Anybody? Board? Okay.
I'm going to talk about private practice definitions. I included it in this memo, but we're going to talk about it more in the next agenda item, so I'm going to wait to do it there.
Okay. Well, I think we're done with this, unless anybody has anything else they want to ask for future meetings related to this. You know what I am just a little confused not confused, I guess, but curious as to why exempt settings ever came into being.
I think it has to do with sort of where our professions came from. I think that, especially like with social work, Christina, feel free to fill me in, but, that started as people on the ground trying to help people who, were poor or either didn't have any support. And, when licensure laws came into being, I think there was still, they wanted to have a way to help those vulnerable individuals and not disenfranchise people who are already out there and maybe didn't qualify. So I think it's just kind of a history of how things progressed. Because if you think about, doctors, I mean, obviously that's something where there's a really clear line of public harm with providing counseling services. I mean, there's a clear line there as well, but it's maybe a little more muddy. You're not life or death always. So that's my best.
No, it makes sense, it does. Anything to add to that?
I think, cover, a good part of it. A lot of the nonprofit organization, historically, it can, have like the religious, background, but mostly, really is, with the mission of, helping, those underserved. So the oversight, it's just not as strong as the government, because it's very easy to set up, a nonprofit organization. So.
It's good to know. I was just reading all my materials thinking,
Can I just get a clarification? I think I'm still trying to puzzle out some of the nuances of this myself. The concept, I think I totally get the concept of a nonprofit, but the part that I'm having a hard time with is the charitable piece. Since you're on the topic, could you elaborate a little bit about at what point or what activity would the organization have to engage in to allow them then to also qualify under that secondary? Because it's not just enough that they be a nonprofit. They also have to be a nonprofit and a charitable. So what constitutes that?
Sure, there are different types of nonprofits and they're defined by the IRS. And so it's a 501c3, that's the section of law, and that's how they're generally referred to as. I don't know what makes something charitable, but I know that if you're a 501c3, you're a nonprofit and charitable. So if you have that designation from the IRS, which, and that's, yeah, and you do have to apply for it. If you're in California, you do both federal and state, and they're both pretty extensive application processes. So, but I don't know exactly what all of those qualifications are. It's something we can bring in.
I mean, semantically, charitable would mean that they're providing a service to someone without it resulting in a benefit or a fee. Or I mean, you can have a fee as long as it's not a business. It's not resulting in a profit. A profit. There you go.
Right.
Can I come up?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's on.
you don't have to
Yeah,
ask.
I think it's on.
You can always come
Okay.
up.
So I run a 501c3, and my understanding of us as a charitable organization is we have to offer the public something that a regular for-profit business does not. So we offer low-cost therapy to the community or no-cost therapy to the community, as well as training to the community or to our profession. So we have to do something that they don't ordinarily get. Yeah.
Thank you, darling. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that help at all?
I think so. I think it's touched on some stuff. Thank you.
Okay, Christy, you're up again. We want to talk about private practice definitions.
Yes. So I think I'm actually going to go a little backwards on this one. I'm going to start with the definitions. So that's page 10 goes into that. And then I'll work backwards and talk about what are the laws what are the BBS related laws that talk about private practice, that mention it specifically and have specific requirements on the private practices. So we brought these definitions to the first meeting. And somehow I missed that the Board of Psychology does have a definition, so that's a new one for this meeting. But it's actually, they're currently pursuing changes to their regulations that would do away with this definition. So, but I wanted to at least bring it so that we have another example. And BBS only has a definition in our LCSW law. And that is a setting that's owned by an LCSW, an LMFT, a psychologist, an LPCC, or a physician, or a professional corporation of any of those licensed professions. So that's in our LCSW law. The Board of Psychology current regulations, again proposed to be stricken, pertain to psychological assistants, which is similar to our interns. And so if you're a psych assistant in a private practice setting, they have to submit a plan for supervised experience to the board, as opposed to them working in a different setting. That plan doesn't have to be submitted up front. It's something that comes later. Their definition is defined as a psychological corporation or a medical corporation, with the exception of a nonprofit corporation supported by donations or a clinic that provides mental health services under contract to a local mental health agency. So they're defining it as a corporation with some exceptions. So I wanted to bring that forward. A lot of the other states do not have a definition. I believe my thinking on this is that it's one of those things that people just kind of take for granted what a private practice is without actually kind of putting a specific definition to it. But I was able to find some, and I think we can get some examples out of here when we get ready to formulate our definition. So, some of the common themes that appear among these definitions is that there's an licensee who has ownership and responsibility for the practice and is not an employee. So that's the ownership piece, ownership responsibility. They've received direct payment or third-party reimbursement, and it's not a they're practicing outside of governmental or nonprofit agency. So, and at some point we are hoping to develop a legal definition of private practice, but believing that we should wait until we talk about, there's a survey that we want to do, and I think the information that comes back from there will help us additionally. So, and then jumping back to the first page of this memo, just want to briefly go over the different laws that do apply to private practice. There's a renewal waiver that someone in the military can apply for if they're on active duty. So they won't have to pay their renewal fees during that time, but they cannot work in a private practice while they do that. So if you're in the military and you want to have a side business, you can't do that if you're getting a waiver of renewal from a our law says you can't work in a private practice until you hold a registration with the board, or of course until you're licensed. And you have to be, of course, under supervision if you're a registrant. It requires an MFT intern or professional counselor intern working in a private practice to be under the direct supervision of a qualified supervisor who is either employed by and practices at the same site as the intern's employer, or who is an owner or shareholder of the private practice. Did not find an equivalent in the LCSW law. The next bullet is it's an example of an exclusion. So there are some things in the law that say in any setting other than a private practice, this can be done. So one example would be MFT or professional counselor trainees or interns who are volunteer and provide services in any setting other than a private practice can be considered employees and not independent contractors if they receive no more than $500 per month in reimbursement of expenses. So this is just one example of something where our law says if it's not a private practice, this is how things can work. So, okay, so the next bullet is a private practice cannot employ more than 3 BBS registrants, and that applies to our licensees only. Our professional corporations are subject to all laws governing experience and supervision gained in a private practice setting. And a professional corporation is defined in our law. That's a certain type. If you want to be a corporation, and if you're one of our licensees, that's the only kind of corporation that you can form. If you use fictitious business name in a private practice. You cannot use a name which is false, misleading, or deceptive, and you have to inform the clients of the name and license type of the practice owners. And MFT, any of our registrants cannot be employed or volunteer in a private practice after their initial 6-year registration runs out. So if you have to get a second registration, you can no longer work in private practice. This next bullet is unique to LEP because I believe nearly all LEPs work for a school district, and maybe they have a small private practice on the side if they have one. Is that accurate? I mean, there probably are some who are.
There are some who do a standalone private practice.
Yeah, I think it's just such a common thing that they do both.
I would say many do both. But
Okay.
there are people who do just exclusively private practice.
Gotcha. So it's our unprofessional conduct laws actually state that an LEP who is employed by another person or agency cannot encourage the employer's or agency's clientele to use his or her private practice for further counseling without approval of the employing agency or administration.
So you can't still clients?
No, that's a good way to put it.
Relocate clients.
Locate that. And then our LPCC law has a definition of community mental health setting, and it excludes private practice from that definition. So that's really it on that one.
So, do you have a question, Christina?
No, I just want to make a comment about, just, it's very inconsistent, little bits and pieces and, the LCSW and the LMFT and the LPCC, and it looks like, there's not a whole lot of substance in the LEP laws. Because when we're trying to look at the school and, just the LEP, Practice Act, doesn't have a whole lot of
Very
substance.
brief, yeah.
It's very brief.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if it is a problematic area, but it seems like, when you look at one license, and then you mentioned in one license, say, a definition, and it doesn't apply to the other.
Mhm.
So it's just kind of, it's just a comment.
No, actually, that was my comment too, was, I made a comment in the margin here, do we need to true these up with across the board as they're all like, and I think that's part of why this committee is helpful, because I think we did the same thing with the supervision committee. We found so many inconsistencies, and I think this is the same thing. You would never know to look for it if you didn't go through these exercises. So I guess that's probably a future agenda item,
Sure.
is determining language and sections, right, and how to put them in. Kim?
Right, I think it would be good, because it seems like the private practice is kind of interwoven throughout all the different license types. So I would encourage us to really think about having one definition for what's private practice. Because it doesn't, even though there's some nuances throughout our law, I think the concept of private practice is pretty consistent across the professions. And I think once we have that definition, I think that would help us. I am particularly partial to the medical dictionary definition.
Me too.
found.
Look, that's what I wrote. This is my
Yeah.
favorite right here.
Yeah, I think it's succinct, it's very clear, and there's not a lot of wiggle room in there.
I liked New York's too, though. I thought New
Yeah.
York's was good too.
Mhm.
But, yeah, I think I said something like use the medical dictionary but with specific language about mental health.
Right.
So take out the other sort of, or did they have something in there about medical or something like that? Yeah, or just adding something about mental health practice. Anyway, okay, so if we go through all of our licensing, and you've already looked for this language in there and you didn't find it, right? And as we do, as Ms. Madsen suggests, by having one overarching definition that can be referenced, that will require changes anyway, right? Because we're going to have to insert it, and then also, I would think you'd probably want to take it out of that LCSW. What do you think? Just to make it would confuse
I
them.
think we would start by doing a definition and then given the definition, re-looking at these sections and examining whether that definition matches with what we're trying to achieve with each of these sections individually as it stands on its own. Does it capture everything we want? Are there other settings that we want to include in that or not? So I think that once we get the definition established, then we can go back and look at and make sure that that there's no unintended consequence to
Yeah.
what's already there.
Absolutely.
Does anybody have any questions regarding private practice or definitions, or everybody understand what's going on here? Debbie, you okay? Everything? All right. Thank you. Good work.
It is very good work.
So we're moving on to the next item on our agenda, our draft survey, which you gave us one, right?
And there was one included, yes.
So we saw an example of draft.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Roseanne's got some information on the practice settings, what the current law is
okay,
right now.
sorry.
We'll talk about that, and then we'll go to the
Sorry,
survey.
Yeah, so the first part of this item, I'm gonna talk about private or practice settings for trainees and how schools place those trainees. And then we'll talk about, coming off of this, we want to do a survey of those schools and trainee sites. And so we'll talk about the survey sort of secondarily, but I wanted to go over some information because one thing that's come to light based on feedback from schools and educators is that there's some issues that people struggle with in terms of finding settings for trainees. So I wanted to go over the definition of trainees and what the law says about acceptable settings for them. So the law provides a definition of a trainee. It's based generally, and for LMFT and LPCC, it's really well defined. For LCSW, a little bit less so. But for LMFT and LPCC, a trainee is basically an unlicensed person who's currently enrolled in their master's degree program. They've completed no less than 12 semester or 18 quarter units of coursework in that degree program. For LCSW law, that there's no specific definition, but it does designate the title of social work intern to refer to somebody that's enrolled in school and working towards gaining their master's of social work. So the law talks about acceptable settings for LMFT trainees and LPCC trainees, and basically it's pretty similar, although there's a slight variation. For LMFT trainees, LMFT trainees are the only ones that can count these hours, and the law says that the setting has to lawfully and regularly provide mental health counseling or psychotherapy. And then it has to also provide oversight to ensure the trainee's work at that setting meets the experience and supervision requirements set forth in the chapter of law and is within the scope of practice of the profession. And then finally, it can't be a private practice owned by a licensed marriage and family therapist, clinical counselor, psychologist, or clinical social worker. LPCC law says the same thing, except for it says that it can't be a private practice and doesn't specify anything about the ownership of the private practice. Not really sure what the origin of that is or why that's there. That's just the way that it was written. The law for LCSWs, it says, it just says that employment in a private practice can't commence until the applicant's registered. It doesn't provide any definition of what a trainee is. It defines a private practice probably the most succinctly of any of our license types. It says a private practice is not a setting owned by a licensed clinical social worker, marriage and family therapist, psychologist, professional clinical counselor, or physician and surgeon, or a professional corporation of any of those licensed professions. But I'm not really sure it really gets into what the practice does. It's kind of an odd definition in terms of it doesn't really match with what Christy just discussed in terms of other examples. It just talks about ownership. When a trainee is going to be placed in a setting as part of their school practicum, there are some certain requirements for LMFTs and LPCC applicants that the site must have. The law says that experience gained by the trainee must be coordinated between the school and the site where the trainee will be working. So the BBS is does not have jurisdiction over this arrangement. It's completely out of the BPS's purview. The school has to approve each site, and there has to be a written agreement with each of the site's responsibilities detailed, including methods of supervision. And I've included some some of the example or written agreements that schools have provided me in this packet as an attachment. There's 3 of them. And then finally, the law says that the written agreement must provide detail on regular progress reports and evaluations of the student's performance. So there are some guidelines set up, and then basically they're on their own to make the situation happen and work. We've received feedback from schools that they have several questions and challenges about what exactly are acceptable settings, and I have to thank Kathleen Wagner from the MFT Orange County Consortium. She's really been helpful in allowing us to gather some of the information about these concerns from various individuals at school sites. And based on the information that she was able to provide for us, there appear to be 2 main concerns that come up when talking to schools about the appropriateness of the trainee site. And the first concern has to do generally with whether or not the site is appropriate due to the particular ownership or profit status. And then questions about whether or not the setting provides appropriate services. Does it regularly provide mental health counseling and psychotherapy, and how do you certify that for sure? Where is there a protection for the school to ensure that, if they think that and then BBS disagrees later, are they going to have a problem or be liable? There's concerns there. And so I've listed here in this memo some of the sample concerns that we got as feedback. In terms of questions about the acceptability of the setting due to its ownership and profit status, we get concerns about there doesn't seem to be a clear definition of private practice, which we just discussed. What if it's not a nonprofit? What if it's a corporation but it's it has a location in California but it's not based in California? So things like that. And then more general questions about the setting. It hasn't historically offered mental health services, but it wants to start doing so. Is that acceptable? How does the school prove that it lawfully and mentally provides mental health counseling? So things like that. So those are some of the questions and issues that educators have indicated that they struggle with. So with that, we want to discuss that, and then Christy's worked to kind of help address that and get at the issue more, a draft survey that we could use to get some more information about exactly the type of settings that are out there. So I'll let her talk about that.
Thank you. Yeah, we're hoping to get more feedback, more of these types of things brought to light by the survey. So this is just sort of a sampling, but attachment B is the draft survey, and then I've provided, in time for the meeting materials, we had just drafted it internally, and then the Office of Professional Examination Services, they're experts on constructing surveys in a way that will get the right, to ask the questions in a way that will result in unbiased responses and that are clear and all of that. So that hadn't taken place at the time the meeting materials came out, so we now have an updated attachment that shows what their suggested changes are. And I've shown that in like strike through and underline. So basically, attachment B, you're up. Yeah, the revised version of it.
The one with the strike through?
Yeah, exactly, that's the one.
Should be on the table back there.
Yeah, there are copies on the table.
If you didn't get one, I think you did. If they're stapled together, you've got them, Christina, right there.
Yeah, right there. Yeah. And this isn't online yet. The original version is, but so if there's anybody watching that wants the updated copy, feel free to email us and we can send that out. There's basically what the suggestions that they made were to just some tightening up a little bit of the language, but the main thing is like on question 2, they had us divided into setting type A and setting type B to kind of help clarify question 2A. So if that way we don't, I guess question 2A they felt was a little bit confusing, so so that information in question 2A is no longer necessary. You'll see the stricken section. So that was really the main change to this survey. Yeah, I think that was really it. So basically what I would like to hear is any feedback on this survey, any changes that, or are there any questions on here that really aren't necessary? Because one of the things that OPES pointed out to me is you want it to be as succinct as possible, and to order the questions in order of importance, because you might lose people toward the end of the survey. So,
Just a quick question. So page 2B, I suppose that's the 2B, right? What's the main focus, purpose of this setting? So where does this pretty, inclusive list come from? Because I'm just looking at the nature of the program. Some of them, it's an interesting, categorization. So I just wonder, is it from the OPS? Yeah, it's all over the map. So
right.
So where is it?
Christina, because there's 2 updated draft surveys, which one are you referring to?
Is that the one with the strikeout? That one?
Well,
That's the
they
most
both have
updated one.
strikeouts.
Oh,
There were
For
2.
item
So-
6 and the other's for item 5. So
Yeah.
one is for the surveys for the practice settings and the other one is
Okay.
Oh, yeah, so.
Sorry,
Question
you
2A, you're looking at question 2A,
Yeah,
and talking about the type B settings?
yes, the page 2, with the school and, with the school and the church underlined.
So not the one for the practicum placement coordinators, but the exempt settings.
It's for the
survey.
exempt
Yes,
settings
Okay.
one.
And is that the one you were talking about, Christine?
No, we're on the
exempt setting,
No, we're not on the exempt setting. We're on the trainee.
training.
Oh, you're on the
Trainee, yeah. So at the
training
very top it should say agenda item 6. I'm sorry. Agenda item 6, attachment B.
Okay, so this is the draft 2 BDS survey, LMFT, LPCC practicum placement coordinator.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
that one. Okay, so I refer to the other list.
how did this get
Oh, she discussed it, we just kind of moved.
So, all right, you have to tell me when you move to the next agenda. So I can
Okay,
pay
that's
attention.
So
Okay.
it's this list, okay.
So I
Yeah,
can
so
say
there- I mean-
agenda item 6.
Right.
Right, agenda item 6. And so in question 2A, there is a list of where we're trying to get, if you look at setting type B, those are the settings we kind of wanted to get a little more information on because we're not as familiar with them. So that would be the not-for-profit entities that are not a registered 501c3. Because what would that be? Are people even in those types of settings? And then for-profit entities, there's a whole range of those that, some of them we've heard about. We've had, we do have people who ask, can I place a trainee in this for-profit entity that's a corporation that's, sometimes they're employee-owned, sometimes they're held by shareholders. So, really, all we have to go back to is those 3 sort of legs that Roseanne was talking about. Does it legally or regularly provide mental health counseling and psychotherapy? Does it provide oversight? Those 3 things. So that's all we have to refer people back to in terms of whether a setting is appropriate. So we're trying to learn more about, the different structures and different types of organizations out there that are providing these services. So.
I think part of the question too, and where the confusion is, we need to better narrow down what settings do we want trainees working in. I think we've kind of, even internally with staff, we've had kind of some different varying interpretations among people of what exactly setting can a trainee work in. For a time, we thought maybe it could only be an exempt setting, but that's not necessarily, it's kind of come to light that that's not really the intent of the law. They can work because they're a trainee, they're gaining their experience, they can work in any setting except private practice. It doesn't have to be an exempt setting. But I don't know that that's necessarily, I think there are some people out there that think that it has to be an exempt setting. So I think that's where some of our questions are coming from. So I think we really need to have a better specification of what exactly are we want to be aware of what we're allowing and what exactly we want to allow a trainee to work in.
Yeah, and hang on a second, I think the confusion for me is that we had 2 surveys, and we had talked about in the last week, we were only going to do one. But can we hear from the public first before I take board member questions?
Sure, so I want to make sure I'm looking at the right one. Am I looking at 5 or 6?
6.
6, okay.
Yeah. But we have to go back to 5 because our board members have questions on
Okay.
5, so.
And I have
let's
questions
stick with
about 5
6 for
too.
right now, yeah.
Okay, so just for number 6, I don't know if this is Kathy Atkins from Camp.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is an odd question, but the number 5 asks, is there settings that are allowed by law that your school feels are not suitable? Would it be an appropriate question to ask them in some manner? Are there placements that aren't allowed by law that you think should be? I mean, I think I'd be curious, and the BBS would be curious, is there, for right now, example, they can't work at private practice, which I don't necessarily advocate, but I'd be curious what the schools, I mean, they're the ones who are seeing their students. Are there places that maybe they should be allowed to work in, or do they have some kind of feeling, because they're seeing what their practicum students are capable or not capable of? So I was just wondering if it'd be worth it to ask that question in the reverse.
And which one are you looking at? Is it a question or your?
Question, it says agenda item 6.
Yeah, but what's the
Question.
question on?
Well, question 5, there is no question. I think there
Okay.
should be.
I see. You want to add it in there?
I would add
'Cause it's missing.
the opposite of 5.
Yeah, okay. So are there certain types of settings that are allowed by law, but that you or your school feels are generally not suitable? So are you asking what is suitable?
No,
Or just asking?
are there settings that are not allowed by law
Okay,
that, and I'm using private practice as an example. Not that I'm advocating for that, but would the school say, we think our trainees should be working in private practice? I would just be curious what they think and what their feedback is, or something like that, just so you're gaining the whole picture.
I'm not sure. I mean, you could just shorten it up and say, are there certain types of settings that you or your school feels are generally not suitable placements for students, and you can put allowed or not allowed by law. I mean, you could just ask it in the same question, and you can leave a space for it. Or, there might be people.
Just food for thought.
Yeah, no, but I mean, there might be folks even who practice and do this stuff that don't know that there are ones that are allowed by law and ones that are not. I mean, so I do think there needs to be, and I'm not sure that's on there. It isn't
We
anywhere.
could wordsmith this to incorporate.
All right, we don't need to do it right this sec, but I think you
there's
got the
value
concern.
in asking, because the practice settings have evolved so much that I think there's value in asking what setting they might be aware of that would be an appropriate setting for a trainee to work in.
Good, thank you, Kathy. Anything else?
I'm going to wait for the next one.
Okay. All right, so, okay. Does anybody have any comments on agenda item 6, the survey for the placement?
I have a question.
Okay,
So,
we're going to stick with this one for a little bit.
yeah,
Okay.
so what my understanding is that if a student, if the practicum, is part of, for the student to get a degree, so eventually, the responsibility really is on the school, to approve the site, so that they know that experience that they're getting, will be qualified for them to earn their degree. So I'm wondering in that sense, because the final approval, I mean, the board doesn't really have much authority, over the trainee, and the intern. So, so I'm just thinking that I know the purpose of the survey is really, on both sides, to the school and also to the students. So what would be the advantage for the student to answer the question, for one?
Well, actually, we didn't intend to send this to the students.
Oh, okay.
But,
Sorry
I mean,
about that.
it's an interesting idea.
The intent initially was to send this out to the school
coordinators.
educators
Right.
and get their feedback, because they have to deal with this day in and day out. But, I don't know that students could provide a lot of insight.
It would have to be a separate survey.
I was actually a little confused. I thought, that would send to the students
Oh,
also,
yeah.
but
That would
if
have
it's
to be-
only
we'd
for
have
the
to do it.
coordinators,
Yeah.
then that would make sense.
Right.
Because they would encounter a lot more experience, whether a site, could be possibly or could not be possible, for, suitable for internship.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good to, it's sort of like going right to the source and asking them, what are the settings that you're
Exactly.
using, and do you like them or not?
Right. I just have
Okay.
another small comment. So number 10, it's only what percentage of your MFT students continue on their site as an MFT intern?
That's true, we could.
Because we can
add
substitute
LTCC.
exactly, or even, the LCSW.
That's true, we could.
Because it's pretty generic.
I think the initial thought was, I think first the suggestion, we also ran the survey through the MFT consortium, I forgot to mention that. And that suggestion came from them, but I was thinking, they can count their pre-degree hours, but, the other license types, you're right, they may be continuing, so we'll go ahead and get rid of the MFT.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
really you're looking at, the suitability, of the
Exactly.
agency, towards, that practicum experience.
Right, good
Yeah.
suggestion.
Yeah.
Register.
Register, yeah.
And what are you hoping to get out of that question? I'm just curious. Because if the higher percentage would tell you that it's a legitimate place and that they're staying on,
It would track what's happening out in the field. I can't tell you the number of phone calls we get, but I can't get a job, or my job depends on this, or I'm going to lose my job, or I need my registration because I've been working here. I started as a practicum student, and now I'm going to lose my job if I don't get my registration issued by A, B, and C. So I think it's a workforce
okay.
question, and that has a little bit of value.
And I remember it was a very thorough discussion about the 90 days rule.
Oh, yes.
So I think that is, a really interesting linkage, when we talk about, that area.
Right.
And actually, as, the supervisors for the students, it's a really valid question because, from my point of view, it's always nice to have students to train as an intern and then be able to, to continue on, as employment, because you save a lot of,
Yeah.
training possibilities,
Mhm.
and time and, energy. So it's actually really wonderful to see, it's both sides, for one, whether the agency has the capacity to absorb them, and the other hand is, whether it really is about, like Kim said, the challenge for them to really need to go out there and, and find a job again. So,
Right. Is the intent too of this to be anonymous? I don't remember.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I think we're at SurveyMonkey, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, yeah, because we talked about this not being some huge statistics.
I think, that this question might be a little bit weak just because your practicum placement coordinators may not know if the students continue on. But I think it'd be interesting to see what we do get, give us some indication at least.
I think that's exactly the question that gets confused. It's like, whether it's open to the student to answer.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because the coordinators won't know.
Right. Yeah, they may not.
Yeah, I understood all the rest of the questions with respect to our purpose of our committee, but that one was a little more muddy to me because I just didn't know why you were asking it, but I understand now. All right, so any other comments on the practice settings surveys? I would like to encourage folks, if this is the first time you've seen it today, or if anybody's watching, to get a copy of this, and please submit any other comments to Christy. Okay, Christy Berger. So we can get that even better than it is.
Do we even have to vote on that?
No, not yet, not yet.
Procedural questions.
Yeah, no, I don't think, we're not ready because this is just a draft. So when we get a final, I think it would be, to have to take action.
Well, actually, I would like to be able to go ahead and go forward with these so that we can get so the committee can progress in its work. So I would like to get a final okay on it.
All right, let's hear from Rebecca.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. I guess my question is Christina pointed out that one question where we could have it apply to all registrants. So the decision for the rest of the survey, though, I'm not sure I understand. Is it only going to be for all the professions, or are we just focusing, it is going to be for all the registrants?
Right, because it's just going to go out in a blast through SurveyMonkey.
Okay.
To the school contacts that we have. We have all the LCSW schools and the MFT schools and the LPCC schools, so it'll just go out to those coordinators.
Right.
And then they will respond. And the very first question is, what types of licenses are being pursued by your students?
Okay.
So that tells us what type of program it is. I think in the LMFT schools, we're going to find that it's a dual track.
Right.
So that'll be helpful.
And so I guess for people who are in their MSW programs, who are in like a macro setting placement, does this apply at all? Because like we have interns in NASW who are working with me to look at legislation and you know, it's really a whole different kind of setting.
Yeah. That's a very different setting.
Right.
So, yeah, we would be able to gather a lot of data from that, the way this is set up.
But for, you know, just to, you know, so for Becca, like what you said, like using NASW as an example, would that fall into the setting as a nonprofit and charitable entities? Because that's also very unique.
Right.
You know, social work is social work, you know, and they deal with macro stuff.
Right.
And those social workers may not necessarily get licensed. Just
Right.
because, you know, license doesn't apply
Right.
to the macro setting. But it doesn't mean that their information is not useful.
Right, right. So I mean, I just kind of wanted to draw that distinction and see if it's something you should think about, and if it's something you're even interested in getting more data on, but I just wanted to point out that social workers do have broader settings than the other professions.
Is there a way you
Well-
can adapt the language to reflect that,
thought
or
about this
does
one.
the board feel that it's sufficient to, the language that's in there to capture Rebecca's concern?
Well, I think, I'm wondering if we flip question 5, as we talked about, for them to identify a setting that's appropriate to work in. What other setting are they aware of? Then that might capture your situation.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying
Yeah.
to leave it open-ended too, or, and then, you know, you could have just have a place for other comments, right? Or if we, I think
You
that's.
know,
Right.
I'm sorry, let me step back. This is actually, we're not looking at social work in this survey.
Right.
We're not looking at social work.
So that was like, yeah, my first question.
I'm so sorry, yeah.
Okay.
It just didn't click for me for some reason.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And the reason you aren't, well, I know why you were doing MFT, because they could get hours while they're in school.
Right, and then the LPCC law was somewhat modeled on
Right.
LMFT law.
Right.
So it was kind of a hybrid.
Right.
Social work law places really no parameters on the types of settings that are and are not allowed. So
Right.
again, it's, you know,
Uh-huh.
different, you know, it was the first license that, you know, was issued, master's level licenses. So a lot of the LCSW laws are different. So this is, again, the surveys for
Okay.
LMFT, LPCC only.
Okay.
That's helpful.
Okay.
So why would we not want to, because there's the population that Rebecca's talking about, but then what about the social worker that's practicum?
Right, so that would be a bigger question for the committee to look at. Do we want to put some restrictions on social work students, similar to what we have in our other laws? So I mean, that would be. That would
Right now,
be
they
the
can
survey.
just get their practicum wherever their school deems.
Yeah, it's up to,
Okay.
really up to the school, and because they have students who are not pursuing licensure, I think and plus their programs that, you know, the Council on Social Work Education, I'm sure has some requirements that they have to meet. So we rely on CSWE to
Right.
regulate some of that. So it would be, I feel it would be a separate survey if we were going to capture, you know, start looking at social work. There would be some different questions you would want to ask and things you would
Okay.
want to get at. So now, you bring up a very interesting point about, you know, CSWE, because yes, they are the national accreditation body, but for LPCC, they also have a national accreditation body. They do, but we don't require that accreditation for our LPCC programs.
Oh, okay. Nor do we do it for the MFTs.
Yes, MFTs have an accrediting body, but again, we don't require
that accreditation.
Right.
So, but social work has to have the CSWE.
Mhm.
That's why California law doesn't even go into what does a degree program have to contain.
Right,
Because it's all described right there.
right, and I think we like it that way.
That's why I didn't even go there really
Right.
with this, so.
I could
Right.
anticipate your answer, but I was
Right.
ask you.
But looking at a lot of these things, like the schools have a written agreement with the site that details each party's responsibilities. I mean, this is all stuff that we do. I mean, this is, it sounds
Well,
very
is it valuable to
familiar.
collect the information on social work settings at all?
I mean, maybe not. I just came up
Oh, I don't know, though,
to show the difference.
One thing Kim was saying was some, that question 10 is a workforce thing, or, so, I mean, is it valuable to, I don't really know, because I'm not one to, change regulation for the sake of changing regulation. I
Right.
don't want to make things more prohibitive. So, but that's not the purpose of this, but I'm just wondering if, I don't know, what would be the harm in, is it really that big of an issue if social workers participated in the survey as long as they identified themselves?
I don't think that it hurts anything because it's.
Does it give you anything?
The basis of the survey is asking where the clinicals, what's
Wouldn't
the
that be
setting that
helpful to
clinical
know?
services are provided in, so.
Wouldn't that be helpful to know?
If a social worker, if a social work school answers, we're still gonna have the information, and we might not have every setting in here that a social worker might work in, but we have an other box where they can write in, so if there's something that's not captured, then they can write that in and capture it.
Maybe you just have a box at the top that says identifier, well, you do right there. You've got your license type. Is
Well,
that
yeah,
what
we
you
do.
said?
So I
Add
think it
social
can
work.
go out to social work schools just as easily, and we would just compile that data for social work schools, on its own.
I think it would be, I don't know, I think it might be an interesting,
Okay.
just so that you can, I mean, we're trying to get as much information about exempt settings as possible. I would like to know if there are differences between, I mean, we sort of anecdotally know that, but let's get some information about that. I don't know, I'd be happy to have a survey and you can go out to the LCSW folks.
And also the LEP, not to make things too complicated.
LEP,
I don't know, I mean, the LEP, it seems like, maybe Betty can speak for that. I'm just, since we're talking about different license types, I don't know, I don't think it's.
I think our path to licensure is so different from the other licenses that it really, the trainee component is all like, it's part of their counseling program. I mean, they're essentially graduating with a credential, with a school credentialing counseling. So all of their pre-graduation trainee stuff is, I mean, we could ask, but I doubt that we'd even get the responses because they're not going to be supervised or they're not going to be even in settings where our licensees are practicing.
So let me ask, where were you intending to distribute this? In what way? Just putting it on our website? Were you going to send it to the professional organizations, the schools? I mean, how were you going to do that?
This first one under 6 that we were looking at, that the intent of this is to, again, send it out to the schools.
Okay.
And distribute it via a
Only
link,
the
survey to
schools.
Monkey, and using our contacts, and then we would also send it out to the professional associations because they have additional contacts of educators that we may not have.
Okay.
So that would be, that's how we've done it in the past, and we've been pretty successful with it.
Okay.
So, and I expect a pretty good response from the MFT consortiums because we've been talking about it. And the LPC programs that are developing are along the same lines with the LMFT schools, and so those contacts are the same, or they know the peers, so it can be forwarded, and we can use CalPIC to disseminate the information as well. So that's how I envision that going out.
yes, same here.
And we can do, for the social workers, we can do the same thing.
Betty, go ahead.
But I agree with Betty, I don't know that we're going to get a lot of value with the LEPs.
No, LEPs, I don't see it, but the point of clarification, and this is just my ignorance, honestly, with some of the other requirements for trainees, Is there a requirement for the other license types, the trainees, LCSW trainees or MFT trainees? Are they required to be in a setting, an exempt setting or whatever it is, but is there a requirement that there be a licensed professional there to provide that supervision?
No.
Because they're under the auspice of the school. The school sets up the practicum
See,
placement.
that's a part of this that's kind of, I feel like there's this huge black hole that we're not going to get information on, because there's probably a lot of settings where people are going as trainees that's not going to be reached by this. Does that make sense?
Well, I hear the concern. I think, where did I see the agreements?
So we're
Well, they
relying
talk
100% on the university or the schools people to provide us with this
But
information.
she said also they were going to get it out through the consortium and some of the professional organizations as well.
Right, because the practicum program is within the degree program.
Right, right.
And so a lot of the courses are, taught by the educators who tend to be licensees, or they're placed in settings where there is a licensee on site. The whole intent of that practicum is to practice what you've learned in the classroom.
Right.
Under the watchful eyes of the people who are going to evaluate how you deliver those services. They refer to the supervisor. Well, see, and even in this agreement, and a lot of the agreements, like if you look at the international, this is, which one was this one?
Looks like Hope International.
Hope International
Hope International.
University. Okay, so if you look at the second page, it talks about the supervisor. Shall be responsible for assuring clinical experience gained by the trainee is within the scope of marriage and family therapy practices. Shall sign and abide by the BBS's MFT responsibility statement for supervisors. That sentence in and of itself, in order for somebody to qualify to sign that, they have to be a licensee of ours.
So that was my question.
Yes.
Is it does sound like somebody has to sign off on
Yes.
something that's that was my question, because my concern was we had trainees possibly going into exempt settings where there wasn't a licensed.
That is true that can happen, yes. And now if you're in an MFT program and you want to count the hours, you do have to have a licensed supervisor. But if you're not counting the hours, or if you're in an LPCC program, because you can't, or LCSW, there's nothing that says you have to. The schools may require it, and that may be why it's in this agreement, because the schools formulate the agreement. They are the one, we don't say what has to be in the agreement other than it has to delineate the responsibilities of each party. And I think maybe for, if you have a program where you really want your students to be well-versed in your profession, you're going to find sites with licensed supervisors, but we do not have that requirement.
Before I get to your question, Christina, can I have Darlene?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as a practicum instructor, that the student is not going to receive credit for those hours unless they've been signed off by a licensed supervisor. It just won't count. And then the other thing is, as a nonprofit, I can't speak for all nonprofits, but yes, in an exempt setting, they could bring in counselors to do whatever, but that's not part of MFT trainee. That would be under the guise of having hours signed off in order to graduate, in order to get through your practicum class.
Right.
Those are the only hours that count. And as an exempt setting, I don't want to mess up my relationship with the schools by bringing people on and just having them do counseling if they're not doing it as a trainee and following all the rules of the schools. So if anyone's doing that as a counselor, the schools don't know about it because they wouldn't allow that.
That makes sense. Knowing our applicants for licensure and those 3,200 hours, there's absolutely no way they want to work for free and not have those count.
Right.
Under any circumstance.
So that would be the MFT training.
That's all they're there for right now, is to get those
Yeah, it's not
out.
because I want to practice, it's I need my hours, because if I get the 500 or the 700 hours now, that means I only need to do 2,300 hours after I get my registration. So I'm working my way there.
This has made me think, though, we might want to add a question. Is there a licensed supervisor on site?
On site. I
Do you-
like
or
that.
Does your school require there to be a licensed supervisor on site?
Yeah, I'd put that in.
I like that addition.
Yeah, you're going to get 100% yes,
Or-
I'm sure.
or
Just
actually,
talking
you know,
everything.
Yeah, maybe not on site. Does your
It's
school
not on
require
site,
a
but-
licensed supervisor to oversee
To
the?
oversee and, or even like to, just to, certify, the hours, something like that, that sort of language.
Okay.
That reminded me of one other thing, if you're going to ask that question, because some, I'm thinking like CPS doesn't have supervisors on staff, so they tell them if they want to gain those hours, they're going to have to hire an outside supervisor.
Right.
So you might want to have something in there
Yeah, that's
to
why it's
address
not on
that.
site, but really it's about the overseeing, those clinical, or even to certify those hours.
But do you want to know that? Do you want to know whether they're having to hire an outside supervisor? Because I know that's been a problem that's been brought up in front of the
Trainings for
board.
hiring outside supervisors? Oh,
If
wow.
they don't have supervisors on staff.
Okay, yeah, I think we want to ask that question.
Okay, so on site.
Because that's a whole nother problem.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's true. No, it's true. Yeah. It is very true.
All right, so
So,
I think, I was just going to say, I'm trying to get you off the lot here so you can get your survey out. So I think you've heard enough questions and probably committee can make a motion to,
well, actually.
okay, what do you need?
We'll let Spencer.
We need Spencer.
Okay.
The committee can't move this forward to the board as a recommendation until the language has been finalized.
Okay.
Does the, well.
Unless you
so-
want to work on it here.
Well-
Finalize the language.
We can.
So the survey would have to go to the board first?
No.
Oh, okay,
No.
okay, gotcha.
Can we
So I need
actually
to
direct
bring it
this?
back to the next meeting
That's
for a
correct.
vote with the
Yeah, we
actual
can do
language.
that.
Oh, I
To make
see.
a recommendation.
Yeah, we can do that. That's what I thought we were doing today in the first place, so.
Got it.
Okay. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to have, all right, so just direct staff to make the changes that you heard today and bring it back at our next committee meeting, and then we can,
We'll go from there.
yeah, we can make a recommendation to the full board.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. All right, all in favor?
Do we need to roll call?
Yeah, roll call, sorry. I've been to too many board meetings this week, honest to God, I really have been. All right, go ahead, Mrs.
Okay.
Kitamura.
Tricia Locklasser?
Yes.
Christina Wong?
Yes.
Cindy Conlon? Yes. Motion carries.
Thank you, okay. Now we're gonna back up, okay? Do you have enough to, what you need to?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then I think the other part of that, which doesn't need to be back into the motion, but is just the decision of who it's going to go to, because we
Right.
discussed several options here today, but. Okay.
Right, so my understanding is we're still going to go to, we're going to have, basically what I want, sorry about that. My understanding is that it will go to educators. Is that correct? Is that still our focus?
Mhm.
On that one, yes.
Okay.
And that you were going to include LCS study or social work,
Social-
but
and
not,
include social work,
but not
exactly.
LAP.
Right.
Okay, that's what my understanding was. Is that the understanding of the rest of the committee members? Those are the changes we discussed. Okay, all right. I think you have your marching orders then. All righty, how about backing up, because Kat's been waiting, she's been waiting. Item 5.
I think I messed up on the agenda item numbers when I updated the surveys. I think I got those backwards, so sorry for the confusion. So what says agenda item 5, I think actually was 6 and vice versa. So
Okay. Well, now we are on the, no, you had it right,
Did I
Didn't
have
you?
it? Well, I think for the last survey, I think I said it was agenda item 6, and then the one that we're on now says agenda item 5 on it.
All right.
It's the attachments that I
Okay.
goofed, so.
Christine had some comments on this one, I think, and then Kathy. Kathy, would you like to go first?
Why don't you go
Well,
first,
can I,
Kathy?
Oh,
just
sorry.
I just want to real briefly
Okay.
go over what the purpose of this survey. And this survey would go to BBS licensees and registrants, and the topic is exempt in private practice settings, just in general. The goals of the survey, we want to get information that will help us determine whether consumers are being harmed in exempt settings by unlicensed staff who are performing clinical services, so assessment, diagnosis, treatment. And then, again, helping inform a legal definition for private practice, for exempt settings, and possibly even for other types of settings. So just wanted to go over that briefly. And the draft survey that was originally included has now been reviewed by the Office of Professional Examination Services, so that has also been provided in the strike-through and underline format.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I have a couple questions. One I was trying to figure out exactly who this is going to. And I don't know if this is possible, but the survey itself, if you look at least in my opinion, the last 2/3 of the questions, if they go to registrants and licensees, I mean, it would seem to me the registrants, certainly most of the registrants and a lot of the licensees wouldn't even know the answers to a lot of this information. It seems more directed to like an agency director or the whoever's in charge of the agency, because is there a shortage of providers in the region? I mean, I think most of us could just guess, but I don't know that they would know. Is the facility exempt? How is it? I'm just kind of picking some. Is the supervision adequate? I guess they could do that. If you just kind of go through the questions, it just doesn't seem to me something that you would typically, a lot of them ask of a registrant versus, like I said, the person who's setting up, running, owning, whatever, what have you, the agency. And so I'm just wondering, is there, I don't know if the BBS can do that, but is there a way to direct it to not just the registrant and the licensees, but the directors? Because my concern is, if I were a registrant, I think the majority of the registrant either aren't going to answer these questions or make them up, or then they'll have to go bug their agency director and say, do you know, is this an area that is short on, license provide? I think your data is going to be somewhat skewed or inaccurate. So I just didn't know if there was a way that you could do that.
Okay, this brings up two questions. One, do we need that question in there? And two, are there other questions you think are like that, and could we just strike them?
I think there's a lot like that.
Okay, so that question, the answer to that second question is no. So, and let's address Kathy's concern regarding who it's going to and who's going to answer it. What's the difference between getting this to the registrants and getting it to agency directors?
Right.
I know, when we initially talked about the survey, the committee felt that registrants and licensees would be the population that we would want to hit, because they're the ones working there. They are the ones who are actually seeing the clients and would maybe have that better knowledge of consumer harm. As an agency director, of course, you would as well. But in us reaching out, I think our thought was, the people who are out there on the ground. And we, definitely, you're right. Some people are not going to know how to answer these questions, but we included an unknown checkbox for, all of them.
Right. It just seems like there's kind of two kinds of questions in here. Like some seem, is there a licensed supervisor on site? Is it adequate? Do you feel client complaints are addressed? Like, to me, registrant, licensing, no problem. But then, like I said, how is the program funded? What's the ownership structure? Like all those things, I envision the registrant walking into their agency director saying, can you fill this out? So I just didn't know if there was a way to, I don't mean to create more work. It just seems if you want accurate data, I don't know that those questions would be accurately answered by a registrant, that's all. And then I also wanted to add, the question y'all were asking about do you continue on your site as an MFT intern from the trainees? You could, if this is going to registrants and licensees, you could put that in here too, because if registrants were answering it, they'd be able to say whether they continued. So you could take that question and put it in here too.
Okay, Betty has a comment or a question.
I'm not sure what it is. One of those. I'm concerned that we're asking a lot of questions about the paraprofessionals that are working in that organization.
About the what?
Paraprofessionals. And I'm not sure that a registrant who is there seeing their clients and who are getting their supervision based on their license requirements, would be able to speak to this whole other body of people who are providing a counseling service under some other auspice. I don't know that they have that. It's kind of the same concern.
Give me
I
an
have.
example of what kind of question are we dealing with paraprofessionals?
Like, does a licensed supervisor provide supervision to paraprofessionals?
How many professionals performing clinical service are assigned to each clinical supervisor? I don't know. I'm concerned about all of the questions that have to do with paraprofessionals, and that our licensees would not have necessarily that information.
So I mean, again, maybe that's more for agency directors, because we really have to ask those questions about.
That's what we want to get at.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what we want to get
But
at, but I think how we get there is the question.
Can you have two surveys? Like, it seems like there's two surveys in here.
Yeah, we can split it out.
Sure. Can I have a quick feedback? So 7A, so now that's the beginning of, checking with the paraprofessional. So now, if if I just clean slate, I don't know anything about, clinical services, then I look at the definition of what you are trying to refer to, in this aspect, right? Does a facility or program allow clinical service, bracket, assessment, diagnosis, and/or treatment? And I can tell you, now, if that's the definition of the clinical service, a lot of them, they will answer no, because, but right now, the paraprofessional, what they do is they find another way to do that. And so,
There are, I think there are also some, I mean, I know you have like peer counselors, is that what you're thinking
yeah,
of?
like the peer
The
counselors, like, like the coaches,
And those are not, I think those are not the
what you're
necessarily the people
targeting.
that we're trying to target. I think it's
Right.
the people who actually are, providing things that cross into the scope of practice,
Right.
being more clinical.
So-
Because I think they do try hard with those, I've seen some of the job descriptions for peer counselors, and it looks like they
Right.
try really hard to keep it
Yeah, to
narrow.
keep it separate,
Mhm.
right. So, so my hope is that, if we go this direction, make sure that we're clear that, clinical service means clinical assessment, clinical diagnosis, and clinical treatment, right? And then we will be having very, very few people answering the paraprofessional that are providing the services. Because that's, I think it's how it's phrased, that there's a possibility that, even though the paraprofessional may be performing those services and they're not answering, they're not reaching to them because of, the possibility of a very small number, maybe doing that. So, I mean, I'm like Betty, I'm not sure if, I'm providing a whole lot of, constructive comments, but that's just my feeling that you might not get a whole lot of response out of this.
Right, but I'm thinking though, I don't know, so I'll tell you my thinking, and then we can try to go from there, is that I'm not sure we necessarily want to look at the peer counselor type of people. We want to get the information about.
I hear you.
Yeah, and that, you're right, there might not be very many people doing that, but that's one of the things we would hopefully find out, get some sort of indication, although I remember if we ask a question that, how many staff are actually doing that.
Okay,
We do ask that question.
Here's the confusion for me. I did not get that draft survey in my packet, that one.
Oh.
I just had the other one, but I have it now because it's a revised one, but I didn't see it initially. It's the
Oh.
first time I've seen it.
Okay.
So that's why I didn't know what you were talking about, paraprofessionals, and now I get it, okay.
Oh, all
My
right.
apologies, it wasn't in my packet, but I printed it out.
Well,
So if we divide this into two different surveys, what questions, do you want to go through really quickly and identify them? Because some of them might have overlap.
So 2 separate surveys, one for agency directors and one for BBS licensees.
Do you
and
want some
registrants.
direction on that, or do you
I think I could
think
probably
you could
give
do
it
it?
well, yeah, I'll go ahead and give me some direct, yeah,
Okay.
it's always helpful
All right.
on that.
So I think for an agency director, you're going to want to use question 3, how is this facility program funded? I don't know that.
And 4. And so those we're removing them from the registrants list. But I keep 5, and let's see, 6 would be
That would be
taken out of the
director.
registrants and into the agency director.
Well, do you think we should actually take these out then for the, because you might have some licensees who know this, you know, they can mark unknown. I feel like some people might be able to answer it and that would help us.
My only comment on that is, going back to her comment about them, it could deter them from filling it out, actually, just because there's too many questions. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Too many questions.
Yeah, you know how you can get overwhelmed with that stuff, and if it's not stuff you know, you start to question, am I supposed to be answering these things? And
So do we want licensees, maybe do one survey for licensees and survey directors?
Yeah.
Or agency directors and then one for registrants? Or do we want to exclude registrants completely?
I don't know. What do you hope to get at? What's your objective for both?
I think we want to keep the registrants in there. I think the licensees, so you're saying licensee/agency director survey complete?
That's what I'm wondering, because.
And then let that be the split, and then the other one to the registrants?
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering that, only because I feel like agency directors will be sort of a limited number. We have a lot of, but I'm just thinking in terms of the amount of data that we get back.
Well, I think it goes back to what's your objective of the survey? Is there a different objective for the registrants? Is there a different objective for the agency directors? The information you want to get out of it?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So, not looking for different information, we're just trying to get a full picture,
Okay.
as full a picture as possible, given this is something we haven't really looked at before. So,
I would incline to keep the registrants and, supervisors to, answer those questions.
Keep like number 6 in there?
Yeah,
Even if the registrant wouldn't know?
they can mark unknown.
Okay.
Those-
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back then to, okay, so we'll leave that in, I guess, if they can mark it on. Okay, 7, so anytime, they'll know that, right? Maybe? Guess just have something from.
Yeah, let's, I
Seven,
think it's
seven.
appropriate for A or B.
Registrants, yeah, okay.
For both.
Okay, 7A is okay.
7A, that would be a director, I would think. Paraprofessionals?
yeah, I think we would include that question for them.
For
For
registrants?
directors?
Or just directors and licensees?
I would think,
Everybody?
I'm thinking so.
Yeah, because they would know.
But I thought, okay,
Yeah.
I mean, are we,
How would students know?
How would, yeah.
Or, sorry, not students, you know what I meant.
Yeah,
Registrants.
exactly. How would they know what the agency requires of paraprofessionals?
They're not, but they wouldn't know what's required, but
they would know if they do, if they
would know
employ
they
them.
had them, which is 7A.
They would know if they had them,
Right,
but the whole rest of them seem
about
to.
qualifications and
Qualifications and,
do they meet standards of
what
care?
are they doing? I mean, I just have hesitation about that.
I'm always, I like to err on the side of parsimony, right? So parsimony there. I like to make it be short and get the information you want out of it.
So maybe we do just do one for agency directors only.
Yeah.
There's
And
a
then the other
little
one is
part
for
of me that
registrants and
feels like,
licensees and we.
Or you could do it for both and just put have a spot for NA. I
you
don't know.
might, my concern is you might get prejudicial data.
From agency directors?
Uh,
Or- or any
I think you're gonna get
Right.
it. I think you're gonna get it anyway, though, because this is just a Survey Monkey. It's not like we're doing a random trial. You know, it's sort of just, it's not a randomized study, so, okay, well,
Maybe the question is more, maybe we don't ask, maybe we to keep it short and sweet, because we're really wanting to know, are people in there doing those services that really aren't licensed to do so, and that's sort of what we're. So maybe maybe you just reframe 7A, something to the effect that the facility or program allow clinical services to be provided by paraprofessionals. Of course, then what they're tattling about unlicensed activity.
Yep.
So that, but in an exempt setting.
In an exempt setting,
setting.
exactly, which is allowed.
Maybe the question is, in this setting, you know, are individuals not seeking licensure allowed to provide these services? Maybe just reframe it.
I think not seeking licensure is less inflammatory.
Yes.
Perhaps.
Mhm. And then we just stop it there, because that's really what we're looking for.
all right.
Yeah.
And not go on to,
No.
cut off questions 8 through,
Right.
well, 8 through,
Well, I like the background check
uh-huh,
question, but
I also like the clinical supervisor, because sometimes, you
Yeah.
know, it might be, you know, they think that, you know, by having a clinical supervisor, they can, you know, kind of suffice that, you know, provide a direction for, those professionals not pursuing unlicensed people to do the service.
so if we do that, we would reframe 7A,
Exactly.
not ask 8, 9, 10, 11, and then maybe look at keeping 12 and 13, because 12 could be a consumer protection issue. Kind of nice to know if they're doing that.
So did you say drop?
Drop, don't ask 8, 9, 10 already got moved.
So 8 or 9, of
Don't
the,
ask 8 or 9 on the survey.
for both?
Either.
For the clinic,
Because
Yeah, but
if we-
isn't 8, 9 kind of getting at the crux of why we're doing this whole
I
thing?
felt like 9 maybe should be
That's sort
kept.
of, yeah, I think
Okay,
it's,
I'm flexible on
yeah,
that.
I think it's
Yeah.
the whole purpose of the survey, I think, is figuring
Okay.
that stuff out. So I would recommend keeping 9.
Okay.
10 would give us an indication of
How many, how prevalent it is.
how prevalent it is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
that-
so keep that.
But as far as the other ones,
8, yeah, and then reframe 7A. What do you think about 11?
I think that can go.
Okay. 12?
Just 12 is good.
Yeah.
Right.
And then I like the licensed supervisor
Right.
one.
Yeah, that kind of gets at it too, right?
Is 14 appropriate, or do we want to?
I'm not sure if you can get a whole lot of accurate answer out of that. I mean, it's
Okay.
worthwhile
Yeah.
to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah, we may not get good data out of that.
Right.
So what do you think? Keep, pitch?
Well, if you think you're not going to get good data, maybe
And
that's
even though you
straight.
get the data, then what do you
What are we gonna do
want
with
to
it?
do with it?
Yeah, that's what I mean about that.
I think the reason I became aware there's a nonprofit that has one licensee and has, I want to say there's 20, maybe more trainees and interns. So I think that was where my thought was coming
Yeah.
from, because they are, so that is happening out there. I don't know that
Then we'll
that's.
keep that. I mean, if it's, if
Okay.
you're aware of it, I think it's
Yeah.
problematic.
Okay.
But going back to 13, do you think 13A and B should be kept? I'm not sure, 13A, I feel like maybe not, we have so many people who have an off-site supervisor, I'm not really sure
Right.
it's important information to gather.
If we're going to delete any of them, I think B doesn't give us a whole lot of value.
Okay, it's just an opinion,
It's
right?
an
And-
opinion.
And really, a lot of this, some of the survey really is subjective. You know, there are
Right.
other pieces of this, we have to keep that in mind as well, but.
But 13 says, hey, is there a licensed supervisor, yes or no?
Mm-hmm,
If yes, is a supervisor on site, yes or no?
mm-hmm,
And then you get data that way.
okay.
And drop
So then get a-
13B.
I would
13B.
drop B.
Okay,
Drop B. Okay.
keep 14.
And then, let's see, are clients informed about the complaint process? Just appropriately, I think those are both fine.
Mhm.
15A and B. Believe certain settings should continue to be exempt.
I think I would not ask 16.
Well, I do think it's kind of nice to get, for the people that are out there, I mean, again, going back to what we're supposed to be doing.
Okay.
I don't know, just even if it is, you know, a narrative and it's subjective, it's still valuable information.
15, and back to 15B, that's again going to be subjective, so,
Yeah, we can, I would agree. I think we could not, because we know how they love us already.
right?
What's your complaint
Christine.
handled by the board?
Well, actually, this was meant for internal.
Yeah.
Like, if there's an internal process at that agency, because we, you know, I'm sure we do get some of those when we can't pursue them. Because
Sure.
they're unlicensed and in an exempt
Right,
state,
right, right.
so.
Well, maybe you want to state that then.
So maybe we do.
Do you have a, you know, I don't know, robust complaint process? Hang on.
No.
So how would you word that then if you?
Well, she does in 15, do clients have a formal mechanism at this agency to have complaints or concerns about the clinical services received or about the
Okay.
therapist addressed? So yay or no? And then are all clients informed about this process, yes or no? And then B is, do you feel like client complaints are addressed appropriately? That's
subjective.
That's in the eye of the, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's very subjective, yeah.
Okay.
Because I can tell you just personal experience, we could do everything correctly, but because I didn't provide the head on the platter, they're still unhappy about the outcome.
Absolutely.
So I think that's what that's the type of answer you're gonna get there.
I would still like to leave 16 though as a narrative, just to, I would love to see what we got out of that.
Okay.
See what folks kept. Okay, Christina,
So
you
get
had
rid
a
of 15B
comment.
then.
Yeah.
We're in agreement on that, okay.
So now, I just want to make sure, so we use the paraprofessional. Have we made the decision to replace it with what language again?
Well, what I was going to do, but maybe we do find a better word, is I was going to put paraprofessional and then in parentheses, individuals not seeking licensure. But do you think we should just use the term and do individuals not seeking licensure?
I think that would
blah,
be,
blah, blah,
because,
for each of the questions?
Because, like Spencer may be practicing psychotherapy, but he's a professional, right? I mean, there are people like that,
Right.
So, so I would really, I like what you said, the individual who is not pursuing mental health licensure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that we can be very specific and be broader, knowing that, you can have an accountant performing psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense?
Yeah.
So what term are you replacing with individual not seeking licensure?
Paraprofessional.
Paraprofessional. Okay. So I had a question. What information are we trying to, or why is it relevant to ask how the program is funded? I'm just curious.
That's to help us formulate definitions for different types of settings.
Okay.
That's not so much at getting at consumer protection, it's to help Roseanne and I when it's time to say, okay, this is a private practice, or this isn't, and this is
Okay.
exempt.
All right.
Yeah, based on those, like, I think one of the definitions was you can't receive more than 25% of your funding federally for Medicaid or Medi-Cal.
Yeah, it's where psychology has that.
Yeah.
So,
The only other comment that I had was that maybe having a space for additional comments or additional
Sure.
concerns that
Yeah.
might not have been
Anything
addressed
else
in
that
the
you wanna add, or-
questionnaire.
Yeah.
That's all. It's just a simple thing. Okay, any other questions or comments on this? Okay.
I need a little more clarification.
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure we decided to do 2 separate surveys, correct?
I think so.
Did we decide we want agency directors and licensees on one and then registrants on the other? I'm not clear. Or we're just going to do agency directors on one and then registrants and licensees over here?
I think,
I mean,
well,
we
let's
could
ask
do-
Kathy. I don't know. You're the one that brought the issue up.
I mean, they all have a box that says unknown. You know, it's easy enough to click the
Yeah.
unknown box if you
What
don't
do you
know.
think?
You're
Who?
talking about,
Two different surveys
you're talking about the
now.
second survey?
One for registrants and one for agency directors, but where does the licensee, where do they go? Who do they get asked? In which survey gets distributed?
I
to
just
them?
bring problems, not solutions.
And for that, we thank you. So,
Well, I like since we have unknown and we've eliminated, well, no, we have.
Seems like licensees would know more, you know what I mean?
Seems like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, okay. Maybe have them in with the, and if you got the unknown there, or if you
get
say,
unknown.
or just put in your instructions, don't answer if you don't know.
And I think you will get more candid answer from the licensees instead of the agency director.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and
Because, if let's say they are the one who hired those professionals who pursue no license, then they're not going to tell you.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we have a list of agency directors.
We can get it.
Okay.
There's two, it's not gonna get all of them, but there's two associations. California Council of anyway, there's two
I know what you're
organizations,
talking
yeah,
about. Okay.
that we can get at.
Okay.
And you, like you mentioned, you could send it to the consortiums, or the associations can send them out, and that helps a little bit.
Okay.
So maybe we do have a separate one just for agency directors.
I think so.
Because that way we know, we could have them self-identify, we could add a question, are you an agency director? But I just kind of feel like maybe that really should be separate and.
If you think you can target them and do it efficiently,
Yeah,
I'd say
I think
do
so.
that.
Okay.
I think it'd be more valuable to know where it's coming from.
And then the licensees and registrants will be grouped into a second survey?
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be fascinating to cross-reference those two.
It will, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so do you have what you need then, Christy and
Let me
Roseanne?
take a quick look before we,
Okay.
because we started going through and saying which ones should be included for agency directors. So were we thinking certain questions should be excluded if you're an agency director? Or are there certain questions that should be excluded for that? Or do we feel that the ones that we're giving to agency directors, there's some that we should not put in our licensing and registrant surveys? So I wasn't clear on where we're heading. Are they going to be the same exact survey, or are they going to vary a little bit?
I think for simplicity, use the same survey since you have the unknown box, but it's definitely up to the committee.
Are we talking, I'm sorry.
So using the same survey, but what should we do, for example, question one, we have to add, are you an agency director, or a separate question that says, are you a director of an agency?
Which we could do, and then we
Which-
could take that data from all of the, I'm pretty sure SurveyMonkey can say, give us all the data from agency directors, like, is there a way to, okay.
Yeah, you can sort
So I
of.
mean,
So you can sort them.
We can
so
sort.
you, so maybe it could just be one survey.
I think so.
Yeah. And then you can actually cross-reference, whether.
The data.
Yeah, we'll have to look at it. Sometimes it gets too complicated in the data this way.
Okay, yeah, so we'll look at SurveyMonkey a little bit closer.
But yeah, no.
I still want to go back to, so you're talking about having the same survey for everybody, but having it sent out differently to self-identify?
Yeah, but Steve's.
That should be fine. I think it should be fine.
It should be fine. We can tweak it. What we could do is we could come back with, the next committee. We can go back to the office and work it and see if it makes sense to keep it all in one.
Okay.
And then if it does, we'll bring that recommendation back. If not, then we'll bring back two separate surveys.
Okay,
Sorry.
that sounds good.
Um,
No, I
yeah.
think that's,
Yeah, because part of what we can do is see how you can sort the data and pull it before it's actually out there. So, and if it won't pull correctly, then it doesn't make sense.
but this is a fantastic first draft.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is really good.
You guys did some good work there.
I know, yes.
Good work, team.
Everything up to 1 through 7 staying, correct? We made changes after 7.
We're
Right.
doing, yeah. And then we're
7, 8, right, okay.
and director question.
And you have what you need, Christina Ketamore, too.
Yes, she does.
Okay. All right.
Do we need to vote on that?
Yeah, we can
No.
still have the same vote. Oh, do we have to vote on that? No.
I think we're just directing
It's
staff.
in draft form,
right?
so it's not necessary.
Okay.
Okay, wanted to. All right. So we are at item number 8, right? Public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have anybody in the audience that wants to bring up any more problems? That's what we deal with up here. It's good. Okay, how about suggestions for future agenda items? I know we're going to hear the 2 surveys are coming back to us. Anything else that we talked about today? Oh, I think there was something with respect to the private practice definitions. Oh, you were going to look through the rest of you're going to look through the licensing classes and.
Well, I think what they were going to do is table that for right now until we got the survey results back. And then based on the survey results from that, we would craft a recommendation for a standard definition of that.
Okay. So that will be on a future agenda. Okay. All right. Well, then, Ms. Wong, did you have anything?
So our next meeting is June 23rd. And then we will be looking back at the survey. Okay, so it's going to be a short meeting.
Yes, because it's also piggybacking on a P&A meeting, if I recall.
Yes.
Correctly.
Yeah, I think for the next 2 meetings, we're pretty back.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In June.
23rd.
Yeah, I want to, start time. P&A in June, what do you think?
P&A in June will be mostly looking at new legislation for the next year. So it should be relatively short.
Okay.
I mean, in half day.
Okay. So in terms of start time preference?
It's on, I know you sent it to.
Yeah.
Maybe 1:30, then we'll cover, we should have enough time,
On-
buffer time.
On the P&A, yeah, because we could start that one at 8:30.
Right. And then, if
And
we
then-
end early, then, it
Right.
shouldn't be too late.
No.
So,
June 23rd.
So having this worked out really.
1:30? Okay, we'll do.
Is that okay for you?
Yeah.
Both of you?
I'm
Betty?
on P&A, so I'm good.
Oh, you're
Christina
here all day.
has a long day.
It's
Okay, so we'll start at 1:30 on June 23rd then for exempt.
Okay, perfect.
You'll be here again? Sacramento?
Yes.
Christina, did you book this room for all of them?
Actually, all of them are booked in the hearing room at the main building. We were just bumped over here because they were actually doing some construction on the room. If you want this room, we can make a change.
I don't, I think it's easier at the main, even though it's bigger.
Yeah.
And colder.
I don't know, we can make them here.
And this is better because at least I can see people's faces up in, the El Dorado room. It's so long.
Oh, I know, yeah. I do like this room better. If it's not a problem, I would prefer it in here.
If it's open, I can make the changes.
All right, thank you. All right, so I am going to, if there's nothing more for the good of the order, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, staff. Fantastic work.